Should you become a K-12 principal in 2022? In this video, we're going to go over some advantages and disadvantages of choosing this particular occupation. We're going to cover the demographics of principals. Is there a gender gap? What is their compensation like? And more. But first, what is a principal? Principals oversee all school operations. They coordinate curriculums, manage staff and teachers, and provide a safe and productive learning environment for students. Principals have a lot of roles and responsibilities. Unlike teachers, they actually have to work during the summers. Principals recruit, hire, and train staff. They enforce discipline and attendance rules. They oversee school logistics programs, including bus and food services. They look over budgets and try and allocate funds for staff, supplies, materials, and equipment. Principals counsel and provide guidance to students regarding personal, academic, vocational, or behavioral issues. And they can even oversee new building construction as well as upgrades and maintenance within the school itself. There is so many moving parts with being a principal. They meet with parents, they meet with politicians, and more. To become a K-12 principal, you need a master's degree. According to the Occupational Information Network, about 37% of employed principals had a master's degree, 44% had a master's degree plus some kind of certificate, and 19% were other. Every single US state is a little bit different with their regulations, but most US states require principals to have a couple years of teaching experience. And their master's degree usually involves education and or leadership. And another thing you have to keep in mind is that if you're working in a public school, you actually have to be licensed in most states. Private schools may be a little bit different. So one big advantage to becoming a principal is the fact that principals tend to really like their job according to surveys. PayScale's most and least meaningful job survey has principals at the top for high meaning and high satisfaction. They're like number 5 or 6 out of 500 different occupations. People really find a lot of meaning and a lot of job satisfaction with being a principal. So the fact that so many principals report high meaning and high job satisfaction means that if you were to become a principal, you most likely would report the same thing. Principals find a lot of value in their work, guiding students, steering them, helping them out, and providing guidance to them and taking care of them. So that PayScale survey has around 500 different occupations. The question is, which career would be right for you? And there's so many different factors to consider when choosing a particular occupation. If you're trying to figure out which career is best for you, we have the program for you called Choose the Right Career. We actually start with over 1,000 different occupations, and we have a 7-step process to filter 1,000 plus occupations down to that one right career for you. If you're interested, there is a link below, and use YouTube-sub in the checkout screen for 10% off. Next, we're going to cover principal compensation, and principals do pretty well. In 2020, the Department of Labor found that the average base salary for a K-12 principal was $103,010. This was more than college professors, elementary school teachers, high school, middle, and preschool teachers by quite a bit. And principals have seen pretty steady wage growth over the years. In the year 2000, the average base salary for a principal, a K-12 principal, was $68,940. This grew to $103,010 in 2020, giving us an average yearly wage growth of around $1,600 per year, which is actually really good in the education industry. Wages for principals are growing much faster than elementary school teachers, high school teachers, middle school teachers, and preschool teachers, but they're not rising quite as fast as college professors. And definitely one way to really boost your pay as a principal is to try and live in certain states that tend to pay principals a lot more than others, mainly states in the Northeast corridor and on the West Coast. The state of New York, the state of California, the state of Washington all tend to pay principals more than the average state. Now, there is one big con regarding the compensation of principals, and that's the fact that a lot of principals will end up working a lot of unpaid overtime. If you're going to be a plumber, if you're going to be an electrician, every hour over 40 hours a week, you're going to get time and a half. And if you're in a state like California, you might even get double time because certain states have much better overtime laws than others. This isn't the case with principals. If a principal ends up working 50, 60 hours a week, they're salaried. They're just going to get their base salary and nothing more. So this is kind of a con for principals. This is a con for teachers. But one thing that principals do have over a lot of other occupations is the fact that principals get a pension. And because they're pretty highly paid, the way pensions are calculated, it's based off your base salary. So because principals have a pretty elevated salary, their pensions will be a bit higher than teachers. Next, let's get into demographics. What kind of people actually become principals. The first thing to understand about the demographics of principals is that there's going to be a gender gap. Pretty much in the educational industry itself, it tends to lean towards women. According to the labor force statistics from the current population survey done in 2020, about 67% of principals are women. The most extreme being preschool and kindergarten teachers, where 99% of preschool and kindergarten teachers are women, but pretty much all teachers tend to have a gender gap except for post-secondary teachers. That basically means teachers after high school. Usually people working at a community college or a university. Now, as far as a racial gap, there really isn't too much of a racial gap for principals. About 80% of principals are white Caucasian, about 15% are African American, and about 3.3% are Asian. And about 12% self-reported as Hispanic/Latino. This wasn't included in the racial statistics because a lot of people can be white, black, Asian, and still consider themselves Hispanic Latino. It's kind of a broad label. Now, when you compare this against the racial makeup of the United States, you notice that Caucasians and African Americans tend to be overrepresented as principals, and Asians and Latinos seem to be less represented. Another interesting fact about the demographics of principals is which Myers-Briggs types principals tend to be. According to the Myers-Briggs company, the ENTJ, also known as the commander, INTJ, the architect, ENFJ, the giver, and INFJ are the most likely Myers-Briggs types to become a principal. Notice that all four of these types have a preference for judging over perceiving, meaning they like structure versus spontaneity, and they have a preference for intuition over sensing. There's a lot of free Myers-Briggs assessments out there. Definitely check one out and see if maybe your Myers-Briggs type lines up with one of these four types. Finally, we have the labor market of principals. How hard is it to actually become a principal? Well, first, like I said previously, you need a master's degree, typically in leadership/education, but you also need probably a couple years of experience teaching. Now, according to the government, there is a lot of employed principals in the United States. They found that there's around 262,000 employed K-12 principals across the US. This is less than the number of college professors, elementary school teachers, high school teachers, but it's still a lot of employed, so plenty of job opportunities because pretty much every school needs a principal. And you can see that over time, the number of employed principals has been rising because there's been population growth in the United States. In the year 2000, there was around 196,000 employed principals. This peaked in 2019 at around 271,000. But unfortunately, after 2019, the number of employed fell a bit to about 262,000. This is most likely due to the coronavirus pandemic. But notice that in 2008, during the last recession, employment was not affected at all for principals. Another way to gauge how competitive it is to become a principal in the United States is to look on job boards. This isn't the best metric because a lot of principals are hired outside of these job boards, but for most occupations, they're a pretty good metric to look at. When I went on Glassdoor, I found about 1,200 job postings across the United States for principals. On Indeed, around 2,000, and on LinkedIn, 47,777 job postings related to principal. Now, to be fair, principal could also mean an accountant that has really climbed the ladder in the Big Four. There's other occupations that have the word principal in it, so there might be some job postings within LinkedIn that are not at all related to being a school principal, which I couldn't filter out. But yeah, it does look pretty competitive. Being a teacher provides transferable skills to becoming a principal. So a lot of these teachers have the opportunity to use their 10 years and try and become a principal. So that it actually probably is pretty competitive to become a principal in 2022. So those are some advantages and disadvantages of choosing this particular occupation. A lot of principals really love their jobs. They have high satisfaction and high meaning. Not a lot of occupations have such a high number of people reporting high satisfaction with their particular jobs. Principals have a huge effect on the next generation, and it's a very influential role. If you enjoyed this video, definitely check out some of my other content on teachers and other occupations in the educational industry. And if you need help choosing a particular career, definitely check out the link below for Choose the Right Career. This will help you overcome analysis paralysis and really find your path. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.